Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're talking about one of my favorite games. This is Cloudspire, a Chip Theory Games production that's all about tower defense and MOBA-style combat. You'll have a faction, you'll be sending out your units to take down an opponent's base. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. In this video, I'm going to rank all of the different factions that are available for Cloudspire, talking about the 4 that come in the core, the Griege expansion, and then the Horizons Dawn, as well as the Uprising expansions. So I'm going to rank all of these from my least favorite to favorite, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of my thoughts as to why I like them and give some reasoning as to maybe why they're so high or why they're so low. I'd love if you shared your thoughts on the different factions in Cloudspire down in the comments below, and I'm curious to hear what you think. With that all being said, let's talk about the different factions in Cloudspire. Before we get into that though, I do want to do a quick overview of Cloudspire for those of you who aren't sure what this game is yet. If you do know what this game is, you know what this overview, you can skip ahead. But Cloudspire is a tower defense MOBA game. You're going to have a faction of characters that you're going to be sending on a path, and then you're going to set up these spires, these towers, that are going to shoot down enemies as they approach your home base. You'll also have these hero units that you can deploy, and they'll be able to move around, use their abilities, and explore. They have way more autonomy, and they're not stuck on that path like the other minions are. You also have the access to what makes this game really special, the factions themselves. So the first thing that makes a faction special are the units. You'll have heroes as well as your base units, and then you'll have the spires that you can deploy, and they'll all have their own special keywords and different abilities that make them unique. And on top of that, you'll have your fortress, and the fortress has all sorts of different little tech trees, upgrade paths that you can take in order to make your faction different. And you'll be purchasing all this stuff through the use of source. That's this blue commodity down here. You can generally generate up to 20 at a time, and then you'll be spending it during the build phase where you'll be able to get a lot of different upgrades and then get some different paths that you can go down in conjunction with your minion and hero abilities. I really like the way that you don't have enough source to buy everything, so you do have to choose the different strategies you want to take part in during that game, which leads to a lot of variability and replayability. Love this game, but let's talk about the factions now. At the bottom of the list, I have the Heirs. The Heirs are the bird faction. They're adorable. They have one of the greatest heroes ever, Darb. He's this cute little budgie that is so adorable, and you'll get to see them here in a second. But the Fortress of Heirs is very straightforward. You're going to have a lot of ways to upgrade your units, to give extra health to your characters. This is very much a beginner's faction, in my opinion. The biggest complication that they have is they have these special units at the bottom here called the Elfin Kazi. These are essentially kamikaze hummingbirds that you can put onto your characters that have the roost ability, and then you can send them out to either explode or you can have them save your other characters. And so you have that choice whenever you deploy them, whether you want to use them for combat or for exploding. You also have access to flying. Most of your units have this, particularly your heroes and then some of your stronger units and the Elfin themselves, and that means that they're going to be immune to most of the attacks in the game except for retaliation or if something has air defense. Now the reason that this is so low on this list is I don't think that there is a lot of different variation in the gameplay for this faction. You have a lot of units that do the same things, that share that same keyword, and for me it's not super compelling. Also, all of your upgrades in your fortress are all pretty basic. You have things that are going to upgrade your units, and then you have ways of generating more health or more resources to actually deploy units, and not a lot that's going to keep me coming back. But I do think this is a very simple one to play, so if you're looking for just a nice simple time, this might be one that you enjoy quite a bit. And I have to admit, Darb, Keem, and Jaylana here, they are some of the greatest heroes in the games just because of that cuteness factor. Let's zoom in on Darb here. Adorable. Love this little guy. You also have access to one of these other cool skills, the Quick Strike ability, which I do think is pretty fun. It allows you to cheat a little bit, and it can be kind of confusing when you first play the game. Quick Strike allows your units to attack before spires fire, and normally the spires fire before your units get a chance to attack. So it can kind of catch people by surprise during their first time as well when they're playing this maybe as their first faction. So that is my number 7, the Heirs. My number 6 goes to the Griege. This is our first expansion faction, and these are the insects. The huge overarching thing that they have is an evolution mechanism. The way it works is you'll have units here, all these bugs, and if they're ungrouped, which means they're not in a stack, you can send them into a source well. When they go into that source well, they lose all of their health but one, flip, and then start generating their health back. Once they're back to full health, they're their better versions of themselves, and then they get deployed, and then they continue towards their path to eliminate the enemy's fortress. So I think this is a really cool thing in concept, but what it actually translates to in gameplay is the evolution mechanism prevents you from grouping your units, and I think that grouping units is a lot of fun. It allows you to hide some surprises in your stacks of minions, and it allows you to make really powerful plays sending in these large groups of gathered characters. When you have to separate your characters out like this, it limits the effectiveness of the different strategies that are available to you, and a lot of the abilities on the characters, like the Burrower's Burrow effect, also are limited to ungrouped units, which I think is unfortunate. Now, with that being said, I do think that the faction here has a lot of really cool things as well. They have a dig mechanism where they can bury on the ground, and then they could pop out some of the upgrades that you can get on your base, allow you to use that. And then you also have Eitri, which is one of the most unique heroes in the entire game. Eitri's health total actually comes from your fortress, and you can move essentially your fortress, your target, onto the map. And I think that's such a cool concept. It doesn't normally work when it happens, but I think it is still a very fun mechanism in general. There's also a lot of effects that you'll see on landmarks that are poisons, toxic fumes. They don't affect the Griege units, which is really cool to have this built-in immunity on your characters, and I think that's a lot of fun as well. Some other highlights here with the, what's it called? The gate ports, maybe? Or the evolution pit? I think it's a High Vaulter. Ah, there it is, the High Vaulter. So the High Vaulter is also a really unique upgrade that you can purchase for this faction, where in the game, you have a mercenary phase where you can purchase units and they can join your team. But with the High Vaulter, instead of having that unit join your team, you can put the unit on the altar, sacrifice it, and then give one type of your minions, so all of your larvae or all of your burrowers, that minion's abilities for the turn. It's terrifying. Played a game of this recently where somebody put an armored unit on the splice table, sacrificed it, and then all of these larvas were just these huge health creatures with armored, and they were really difficult to take down. So very scary stuff here. So you have a lot of these abilities that are going to be playing into that evolution mechanism, and then the High Vaulter, which is also a lot of fun. But overall, I think that this is one that it's not my first pick, but it is definitely a good challenge, so I do recommend you give this one a try, because it is a different play style than a lot of the other factions, with needing to use those source wells for your evolution instead of using them for your spires like you normally would in a standard game. So that's my number 6, the Griege. My number 5 goes to the Brawnen. Now, Brawnen is also a more simplistic faction. However, they have some things that I think do make them stand out a little bit more than the Heirs, which is why they're here. And I want to talk about this really quick. None of these factions are bad. I think all these factions are pretty awesome. They're fun. They all have their unique gimmicks, but I think that some do those gimmicks a little bit more and just have more to offer in general with the strategy and choices. So the Brawnen here are giants. They're these terrible giants that are going to be controlling the game through the use of building. So they have this unique feature where their buildings are going to be able to surpass the upgrade limit. Normally when you build a spire, there are going to be these little dots on the spire that determine how many upgrades that it can hold. So this Lance Launcher can hold a total of 4 upgrades. But they have a lot of effects and even minions like the Architect here that can use their effects to add more upgrades than were possible. So you're going to be creating these gigantic towers, these huge spires, and I think that is a lot of fun. The other thing I really appreciate this is your source is not being spent just on the spires, but on upgrades that allow you to improve your spires. And I think that's really important because one of the win conditions in the game, if neither player destroys each other's base, is the number of upgrades plus your health. So I really like being able to build these really cool spires, and your siege towers even have the abilities here to attack other spires. Normally you can only attack minions and units, but the towers for the Brawnen can specifically attack other players' spires. This also means during that mercenary phase, when you're able to buy those unique units for your character from the market, you can also pick spires, and these spires you can make even more monstrous than they normally were intended to be. So I think that's a lot of fun. You also have access to some really unique heroes with Osh, Drang, and Cram. Osh is really good at hunting. He's able to defeat those landmark minions more effectively, which allows you to build your spires, which is great. And then you have Drang, which is another character that interacts with spires. He has Spire Shot, so you can send her on top of one of your spires and use the spire's range instead of hers. So I love that it's leaning into other strategy where you're focusing on really long distance spires, and then you have a hero that can take advantage of that as well. And lastly, you have Kram, who is just a very solid unit, and you'll see that there's also this other terrifying unit here, the Forsaken units, which are essentially big, dumb giants. Every turn you gotta roll a die and see if they attack or move, and you can spec into technology that makes them more effective units. I really like how you can invest in lots of small units, you can invest in the spires, you can invest in this Forsaken strategy. There's a lot of different paths in this entire faction, yet it is still straightforward. So this is actually the faction that I recommend people try when they are playing Cloudspire for the first time, because I do think it's the most approachable, and honestly, it has a lot of great feeling moments. You're going to be creating giant spires, taking out people, rolling dice almost every turn as players come forward, and then when you are hitting, you're hitting for some big damage, either with your heroes that are gigantic, or with your Forsaken units who are also pretty scary. So I really like the Brawnen faction, and they've just got some great ways to do some extra building when it comes to their fortresses, as well as ways to get more source with their mining and all these other additional upgrades. So that is the Brawnen, my number 5. My number 4 goes to the Grovetenders. These are the Ents. They are going to be controlling the trees, and the coolest thing about them is that they can use their source, so their energy, not just for upgrading, not just for building spires, but for summoning additional units. Most of them have ways that they can bring out other characters. So the primary character that does that is what's called the Taproot, and you can pay a certain amount of source, and based on how much you pay, that's going to summon something on top of it. The Taproot will upgrade, go under the unit they've summoned, and so it sort of mimics this character riding this creature into battle. So I think this is really fun. It does have a similar issue with the Larva and the Griege faction, where they have to be ungrouped to use this effect. However, you can get around that by putting the Taproots just on the bottom of the stack, which I think makes a lot of sense. It's almost your last hurrah. You have this giant stack of units, and you summon the Taproot, you spend your source that you've collected in the round, and then you have another wave of creatures that are going to be coming out. So you'll often see a lot of pairs of these, what are these called? These Grovetender units, paired up together and then running down the battlefield. I really like this strategy, and they also have a lot of range, really different effects when it comes to positioning, so it plays into the tactical movement, which I really appreciate. You have the Warbriars, who deal extra damage if they end next to characters. You have the Treed here, who have rams, so they can deal extra damage to spires. And then you also have a lot of very interesting spires. So you have the shrubbery, the creeping vines, the retall, so you have lots of different types. And these characters even have the ability where they can move, the creeping vines in particular. So you can get closer and closer. You can move your influence during the game, and you can position yourself into some very awkward positions. And I really like that. You also have some characters that are very safe from range attacks when it comes to the spires. And then your heroes are some of the most interesting ones. Daiwin is a very basic hero with range and pacify. They can immediately get rid of ley marks if you need the area for setting up a spire. You have Yabanth, who has the evoke ability. They can spend source to summon additional things, very similarly to a Taproot. And then you have this very strange character, Waivanke, and they have an ability where they can just blip characters out of existence. It's pretty terrifying to see this small, slow character creeping up on you, because you know that it has that ability to just defeat things instantly, almost like Tesla's damage. So it's very scary having these big characters. So you have a great mix of different effects and abilities that play into the tactics of the game and the different upgrade paths. And speaking of upgrade paths in the Fortress, you have all sorts of different ways to generate more source to pay for different characters, trade in your unit summoning resource to get more source to summon through the Taproot effects. You have ways to increase your fortress's health, ways to get healing, and ways to make it so that hitting your fortress is going to not necessarily kick you out of the game. You're able to increase the amount of damage that your spires do, make it so that you can never miss, you can modify your odds. There's a lot to love with the Grovetenders, but I do think that the coolest mechanism here is definitely that summon mechanism, having a lot of options pretty much every turn. Great faction here. This is the Grovetenders, my number 4. My number 3 goes to Horizon's Wrath. This is one of the newest expansion units, and they are pirates. They are going to be sailing a giant pirate ship fortress, and instead of the normal upgrades, they have a variety of different upgrades on their gun deck that you can choose. and you can pick them in any order. They're actually going to have a fortress that resembles a pirate ship, and they have these cannons that are going to shoot in direct lines. And so when you upgrade, you're going to pick which of those cannons you want to actually upgrade. And you also will be paying source in order to purchase cannonballs. They work very similarly to spires, but they shoot in a straight line. So you could, if you need to, shoot one of your own units. You have some units in here that actually explode when they're at a certain amount of health. The powder monkeys, when they can detonate. And then you also have a lot of different ways that you can upgrade your different characters and choose the different spires that you have access to. And one of my favorite strategies for this faction in particular is a huge rush strategy, and that has to do with one of the most unique units here, the Swabby. The Swabby has no inherent cost to play, and when they're defeated, anything that they're grouped with comes into play activated. And if this Swabby is already upgraded, it's going to give that unit that it upgraded an immediate activation. I love this strategy of grouping huge units and sending the Swabby full of units and just continuously upgrading and having really oppressive early turns. So I like this aggressive strategy that these characters bring. And to feed into that aggressive strategy, we have their heroes, and the heroes have the Pistolier and Swashbuckler traits. So Pistolier means that they can attack from a range when they normally wouldn't be able to do, and Swashbuckler says that when they attack, they can increase the damage that they deal. However, they don't receive any of the rewards. So I love that you're trading in the potential rewards from defeating things for immediate bonuses and positioning. So there's some great tactical choices here and long-term strategy when it comes to the Horizon's Wrath. And lastly, their spires are so unique. And I've actually yet to have a game where I'm able to make it work successfully. But some of their spires here are just so strange. One of them in particular is a gunboat. And this actually harkens back to classic tower defense games where they have directional attack. They can only actually shoot in the direction that they're pointing. And some of the upgrades will allow you to move and modify your gunboats. But if you have appropriate positioning, these are very cheap for some crazy range and some crazy damage. So if you're able to plan it successfully, these gunboats can be a huge advantage, and it's something really interesting to work around. So I'm still working on making this work for myself, but I am excited for when I finally clicks and I'm able to make it worthwhile. So that's the gunboat, another awesome faction upgrade here. And then lastly, some of the other things that you can upgrade here, you have different ways that you can recruit those Swabbies. Normally when they're defeated, you have to pay for them, so you can decrease that cost. And then you also have ways that you can get additional manipulation during the market through the gateboard. Most factions have this, but I love the fact that you can purchase things from the discard pile, so things that have already been defeated. So if there's a character that continues to get defeated, I think that's awesome. So you can really benefit from these characters that you may have missed in earlier market phases and then be able to benefit from them instead. So I really like the options here. I think that the Horizon's Wrath in general is a very different faction. It plays so strangely because you're missing out on the upgrades by using the swashbuckling system. You are feeding your source, or you could feed your source into the gun deck and get lots of different cannons. And so the entire experience of playing Horizon's Wrath feels like something you've never tried in Cloudspire, and I think it's worth trying out, particularly if you enjoy the game and you're looking for something fresh and different. So that is my number 3, Horizon's Wrath. And then number 2 is my favorite from the core system. This is the Narora. They are the energy people. They are people who worship the source, consume it, and eventually become it. And that's actually reflected in their units because they have the ability, when they die, well, it's not really ability, it's a hindrance that when they die, they're gone. They go to the sacred graves or something like that. And you can purchase upgrades on your characters in order to bring back these units. And that's what the whole Forgotten Graves is about. You can make it so that they all refresh every time. You can pay a certain amount of source to refresh your characters every time. It's kind of interesting that not only is the source and the health of your town or resource and your CP, but also the unit chips themselves. So I like the juggling of the different resources, in this case, your units. The other thing that this faction has that's very different than the others is every single unit they have is double-sided. So they have the most choice when it comes to different characters that they can pick. Every turn you're going to have a lot of CP and you're going to try to mix match your different characters so that it works out well. It's fitting your strategy. You have characters that have abilities from all of the different factions, essentially. You have ways that you can steal source, you have ways that you can upgrade buildings, you have range, you have self-destruction, you have ways that you can become immune to certain types of damage, and that's all present in the different choices that you have. And so every round, it's a pretty hard puzzle to figure out what you're actually going to deploy that round. This faction also has access to portals, refractors, and monoliths with the effect connected. So the portal is really interesting. You have ways that you can spawn Narorans through the portals and jump on the map, and I love that. You can find shortcuts, you can use your different characters to move these spires into terrible positions and just really rush your opponents, and I think that's a really fun strategy to make work. And the other ones that you can do is you can focus on something very similar to the Brawnen with the connected trait here. Their upgrade capacity, any spire with connected, is increased by 1 for each other connected spire on the board. So if you have an army of spires, you're essentially going to be able to make a giant wall. And I think that's pretty terrifying. But this is a double-edged sword, because if you're spending your upgrades on these spires, you're not spending them on your base, which means that you're probably not going to win in the endgame unless you're able to defeat that opponent's fortress. So I really like that that is an option. The other things I really like about this faction have to do with their Fanatic Tower. This is such an interesting concept. You have this die that you'll roll, and it increases your Fanatic Tower range. It's caps at 5 at the beginning, then 7, then 8, but it always gets better the more that you play and the more that you purchase for it. And this is going to increase the range of your other actions. You have different chambers where you can teleport things. You have bombs that you can shoot off. You can teleport different characters back into your base with the recall ring here. And I think that's really fun, being able to manipulate within a certain range of your base, making your opponents really terrified about getting too close. But Narora is a lot of fun. I love the options, and whenever I get a chance to play their faction, I am always excited to in that core game. But my number 1 is going to go to the newest faction that I've played, but the one that I'm excited to play more than any other. This is the Uprising. The Uprising is the newest expansion faction, and their whole deal is they work with mercenary chips. So the mercenary chips are those things that you buy during the market phase. Normally you have the option to buy one of them, and then that's it. But the Uprising, the way they work is they start the game with a bunch of mercenary chips. As you can see here, they're set up. They're going to be drawing additional minions, heroes, spires, equipment that are in their barracks. And then instead of paying the source, the blue cost, in order to play them, you're actually going to be using your CP, your champion points, in order to summon your units that you've purchased from your mercenaries. So this is already a very interesting twist, because the character themselves, the Uprising, they only have 3 different units. They have their singular hero, their basic starting hero, Narora. They have the Militia Defender and the Militia Ranger, which are on a double-sided coin. And then they have a single Spire, the Rebel Rouser and the Rebuilt Ruins, that are also on a single-sided coin. And this is so fascinating to me, because you are playing pretty much completely on the fly. This faction reminds me a lot of Too Many Bones' Nugget, where you're not just playing with your hero, you're playing with the entirety of, not the treasure deck in this case, but the entire mercenary stack. And in the market phase, you even have options to dig deeper for specific abilities that you think you might need, which I think is super fun. So during that market phase, you get to take 3 extra turns. You can purchase a card from the mercenary area, and when you purchase things, you never actually pay for them. They just go into your barracks, and the things you can summon later with your CP, or you can discard and refill everything. So you're able to search really quickly for as many different chips as you'd like to add to your barracks, and sometimes you have to decide to stop in order to actually get some things, as opposed to just filtering through the deck as much as possible. In addition to this, you also have the waygates here. Narora has an ability to build waygates onto the board, and this is going to give you new spawn points, as well as defensive measures. You can destroy waygates by flipping them over in order to automatically defeat minions. So it does pay to invest in putting up these different spawn points. However, if you do that, it is going to give you more different ways for people to approach your fortress, and might put you in a little bit of a bind. However, they do have to decide on which one they might go to. But this does play into the whole spires thing, where you could purposely build a waygate somewhere, have it explode just so that the enemy team takes more time to get back to your base, and then when they're on their way back, they have to pass through your spires again, which will do even more damage. So there's some good choices here of knowing when and where to build things, your positioning on your spires, knowing which units to purchase, and then the abilities that you can purchase for this section here is so much fun. First off, you have signing bonus, which is you'll roll a die and you can pay you get an additional reward of CP when you summon a specific type of unit or if you take a type of unit from the market. Another fun one is covert ops here. These are all different operations, very similarly to the pirate faction. You could do these in any order, and if you are able to complete this mini objective during this round, you get additional CP, so the champion points for deployment in the next round. I love giving yourself these mini objectives and seeing what you can actually make work, and hopefully they pay off. I love this idea. You also have ways that you're going to be able to just gain more CP and source every time that you reveal landmarks or just enter your normal phase, so you can actually use more of those units that you're purchasing during the mercenary recruiting phase. What's called the market phase, when you buy stuff during the market phase. So the headquarters here allows you to just get more CP to purchase stuff, which you'll probably need because the cost of the market chips is generally a little bit higher because they imagine that you're going to be spending source on them. So you're still having to budget appropriately, so succeeding on those covert ops is pretty dang important. But the biggest thing with this is you'll have an entire list of mercenaries and landmarks at your disposal, all of these different new spires, equipment for your different characters, and there's even an upgrade that will allow you to equip equipment to not just your heroes but also your minions, so you can really customize your layouts of your different heroes and your minions and your spires in any way that you see fit. So I love the tactical play of the Uprising, and I love that you just get to see all of these different units and see how they work well together. But that's my number one, the Uprising. And that's the list. Those are my favorite Cloudspire factions. The reasons why, I'm curious, what are your favorite Cloudspire factions? I'd love to hear what you think, but thank you so much for watching SideGame Strong.